So I finished well, I can't say I finished because they still have like the wedding and stuff for this webtoon. Is called The Villainess Flips the Script. And I must say, this was a very enjoyable read. You know, this is a genre that falls into the isekai transmigration situation. But if you read it to this point, where it's like 115 something chapters, you know where it gets really unique. And so I really enjoyed it before getting to that like big reveal because she was so relatable as a character. It wasn't like she was like ultra intelligent, that she could just grasp all the situations, resolve everything, but she also wasn't useless, if that makes any sense. For many of us that like to read webtoons, especially ones where there's like isekai and transmigration of like the main character, and the main character is a female lead, they love to make them very useless. Not in all cases. I became the matriarch is a great example of a character that's like super intelligent, knows what they're doing. So there are cases where that's not true. But in many others, this character was so intelligent, and the moment the male lead comes in, she becomes a dum-dum. And I'm so happy that this character did not become a dum-dum. Or maybe I interpreted her as not becoming a dum-dum. But I read all these chapters recently again, together, like from 1 to like 115 or something. So I kind of saw the story cohesively, and she seemed like, yes, she was involved with the male lead. She was very interested in him. She thought about love, but she always also kept herself level-headed enough where she was always thinking ahead of what was going to happen. So the premise of the story is that she transmigrates into a novel when she accidentally dies, when getting run over by a car, or she thinks she dies. And in the story, she becomes the abusive aunt of the male lead, who at the end ends up getting back his duchy, but he's like alone. His uncle's dead. His aunt, who was her, is dead. His grandparents, everybody he cares about dies. He also ends up having to essentially live in the slums and come back as a war hero in order to take back his duchy. And he's just miserable at the end, and you kind of see how sad and lonely he is. And so that's the story she comes in. She comes in when it's like 1 month before his 10th birthday, and the child essentially doesn't trust her, sees her as like shifty. And so she's kind of now having to try to make this child's life better, because she knows that he's going to be taken by his uncle to go back to the duchy, because he's the sole heir because of very complicated family reasons, which I love this story because they kept everything very realistic, if that makes sense, quote unquote, or more like the characters were all imperfect. There was no character that was like a perfect character. Or an innocent character, if that makes any sense. So the aunt definitely had her bad stuff, like not bad stuff, but like she had her moments that she wasn't the best person, particularly when she was overwhelmed by the fact that all her family members died and she was taking care of her nephew, and she took off her frustrations on her nephew because it is a very hard life for a single, unmarried woman to, also a woman that's like a fallen noble. Now she can't really get married because she has this child, and even though she's like virgin and all this stuff, and people know it's not her child, it limits who she can marry, which means it limits the amount of money she can make, and it also limits the type of interaction she can have with people, because everybody in the village was very disrespectful to her, particularly the men. When I'm saying with everybody in the village, I mean the men. The men were just absolutely awful, and especially in like the later chapters, like the last few chapters that are recently out, you see this, and I kind of like how they brought that in. They brought perspective into the reason why the aunt acted the way she did. They don't ever say that it was a good thing. They don't ever try to remove responsibility from her, but they explain the process of where she got there. and it's very important to see so we can understand her character as Judith throughout the story, but also see the ending itself, which was very, very, I love that ending. I'll probably spoil it, but I want to get to the end before I spoil it. So spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil it. So yeah, I love that part about Judith. And then I also love, I never said his name, Rudiger, whatever. I'm going to put his face up here. I loved him because he was a perfect example of someone that was emotionally neglected as a child, physically neglected as a child, and how he kind of had to make his own life, and how he still has a lot to grow, honestly. I don't think he realizes how badly his parents' neglect really did a number on him. He almost seems emotionally constipated a lot of the times, like he can't grasp when like the things he says, like he almost reads as like autistic, like he can't figure out social interactions, or like he doesn't care about what people think about him, or like rumors. He doesn't care about any of that. But I don't believe he's autistic. Well, I don't know. Can't say he's not, or I can't say he is, but I do know it comes from his neglect. In terms of like he had no emotional outlet, so he just learned to go within and deal with that. So I loved his character as a male lead, mostly because it showed his growth. Particularly if you see his interactions in the novel versus like this new version, where he couldn't even grasp how to truly take care of the main character or the protagonist, which is, am I forgetting his name? The little boy with the curly hair, the curly blonde hair. Luca, yes, perfect. He couldn't really figure out how to interact with him. It was like a lot of responsibility, and although I feel like he did love him, in some cases he wasn't aware of his love, or couldn't like articulate it well enough, if that makes any sense. He only saw it connected to responsibility, and this one was much easier for him to, now that he knows he loves Judith, for him to grow as a character and see his love for Luca as well as what it is. It's not responsibility. It's because I genuinely enjoy being with him. They have a lot of banter. They also are very similar in character, probably because Luca was raised by him in the past life, or sorry, in the novel. So I'm gonna spoil it a little bit, I guess, from this point, because I kind of already said it. So the whole thing at the end, no, let me keep going with the characters and then I'll go to the end. So they're very similar, right? They act very similarly. They read in the same way. It was very cute actually seeing it. I thought it was just like a familial thing, like they both came out like their dad, like the current Duke. But it wasn't just that. There's like other reasons. But anyways, love Rudiger. Lucas was a very interesting character because you knew from the beginning that there was something off, and you kind of already like assumed that he like probably time traveled, like he regressed because he was too adult, and also everything that he experienced embarrassment in the first life, he didn't experience any of that because he knew all noble etiquette, he knew history, he knew education. He was just essentially the perfect noble from the beginning, and that could only be explained if he had already done this once. So I always kind of assumed that he would probably regress. I didn't think he was like an adult that transmigrated. I think he was his own version, and that was proven right at the end, because he did use, especially when they brought up the artifact in the duchy that they keep for like that gauntlet, the witching gauntlet. When they brought that up, I was like, yep, Luca used that to turn back time. But he really didn't use it to turn back time. He just wanted to be happy, and then so the chalice decided, oh, you want to be happy? The only way to do that is to turn back time. But also, and this is the big reveal, change your aunt's memories so that she remembers her past life. So it's not that Judith was replaced. It was by the girl that came from the world. It was that she remembered her past life. She almost did die when she was hit by the car, but the car stopped enough, and then she like gets up, she gets home, and she lives her life, and then dies a peaceful death, like through old age. So she lives her life perfectly in that lifetime, and then she's reborn in this new world as Judith. But her memories get mixed up because the chalice removes a lot of her memories and then kind of transplants some of Lucas's memories. So it makes her feel like she read it. She felt like she had read the actual story because the memories were not her own. They were like almost like watching a film. So she was like, oh, she assumed that she had read it in her past life, particularly because they removed a lot of Judith's memories and kind of just pushed it up so that she remembered only her past life's memories up to the point where she almost died. And so she started acting like herself from that lifetime and not the one from this lifetime, in which she was birthed into a family where her father would be willing to sell one of his daughters because he had a gambling addiction. And also, she's in a very tough environment, and now being a fallen noble, the men around her area, because she lives in a poor area, are not very safe to be around with. And a lot of them liked her sister because she was beautiful. Her father tried to essentially pimp her out at this noble party because she was beautiful. The idea was that she would find herself a successful suitor so that take care of the entire family and take care of her father's death. That didn't end up happening, but she did end up sleeping with Jonas, which turned out to be a bigger piece of poop than we originally thought. But I'll get to that. So she ends up sleeping with him just because he was beautiful, whatever. She just wanted to have a rebellious moment. She didn't want her. She knew she wasn't gonna like really marry anyone to make her father's life easier. She did not like her father. None of them did. But anyways, so she comes back. Now she gets pregnant, and then everybody's like attitude towards her, particularly the men who were always like chasing her, started treating her like crap. All the people in the neighborhood started like. Because the thing is, in a small environment, like a village or a small town, rumors can really kill someone. And so they started talking about all these rumors, spreading her name. And finally, in this time, their father dies. Which in a way, they all were happy that it kind of happened because he was a liability, to be honest. This man he would have sold all of them in order to keep gambling. Let's just say that. And so now is the three of them, the mother and the two daughters, which is Judith and her sister Lalisa, and the baby, Luca, and then the plague comes. And she ends up losing her mother, then her sister. Now she's taking care of this child, a 5-year-old child on her own. I don't even know how a woman of her environment would have been able to do that at that time without essentially becoming, an ex-EX worker. Because a lot of times that was the only way that many women could support themselves, since many couldn't own property or stuff. But in this world, it seems like they can, because the princess can become the king, and also the founding emperor was actually a female. She was a woman. She was a woman emperor. So I don't know if that's true in this case, but she comes from heavy poverty. She lives very near the slums, so I can understand that. And so at some point, she's taking care of this child like usual. And then she realizes she doesn't look anything like her sister. And then that flips in her brain. And she realizes, oh, this child looks like his father, the man that ruined my sister's life. Which I think that's where her brain really goes offline, because probably due to trauma, of course. Because Lalisa chose to sleep with him. Nobody made her do that. She chose that, and she says she chose that for her own choice. So this is not Luca's fault at all. This is where she really goes off the rail. I can understand the frustration and everything, and I think even Luca, when he got older, understood where she was coming from, because she would cry herself to sleep every single night. So I think Luca was able, as he was older, to forgive her, which is why the ending, when she apologizes for how she treated him because he didn't deserve that, he says, I accept your apology because I understand how difficult it was. It wasn't good, it wasn't a good thing to do, but he understood where she was coming from, and it humanized her to him instead of her being this monster. But also because there was a moment where Luca probably would have died much earlier if it wasn't for his aunt, essentially sacrificing herself and preventing France from killing him, which we get a glimpse of that in the beginning, where we see her being held captive and killed by Frances. She's like, where did that come from? Because that wasn't part of the novel, but that was her real memory that was kind of slipping in and out. But she thought, again, that she was a transmigrator. She didn't really know where to pinpoint that. But there was also a lot of things in this story that were very, very, again, I say realistic, but I more feel like it allowed characters to have a lot of gray area. For instance, Princess Vanessa. Princess Vanessa was not this, I don't know, innocent princess that like was just tortured under her father. Like she was definitely completely restricted by her father, because Jesus Christ, I've never seen a parent do that to their own child. Like insanity. But then again, there are probably parents that do this to their children in real life. But he like transplanted or like transimposed his trauma with his sister on his daughter just because she had light purple eyes. And he restricted her life so significantly that in order to rebel, she started doing all these debaucherous things. And then ends up pregnant, and now she's like, oh no, my father was gonna kill me. So she ends up marrying this random dude, but the thing is, she didn't just like, do it she used her, as leverage, she used her maid. Which was absolutely, I was like, girl, the one person that actually loves you undeniably, your maid. But okay, thank God for Sophia that she kind of lived good after this, because Jesus. But also the Duke, he was like, yeah, she's the one I want. I know she don't marry me because she's so loyal to you. But okay, we'll do this deal, But the thing she said, I will have this child and then I'll fake my death and leave it. And then Sophia will be trapped there because she'll feel too guilty to leave my child. I was like, okay, Sophia way too good, but that's just, okay, sure. And that really was what's going to happen. And then unfortunately for her, she really did end up dying. And then Jonas grew up and she was taken care of exclusively by Sophia, with all love and care. But Jonas grew up to be a little piece of poop who couldn't even value the fact that he was taken care of so well, to the point that his brother was misused. And also he used his brother, Rudiger, to like fight all his duels. Which, a duel is a life or death situation. So the fact that he felt so comfortable doing that was just like out of this world. Like he really felt so entitled. But I also know that that's like a fact of the environment that they created for him. They really made him think that he was that great. He thought he was like the next thing since sliced bread because they all made him feel that way. And he also didn't know of his lineage, so he really thought he was part with Winterwald and part of the royal family, and that he could essentially usurp the king. And I was like, oh, all right. I don't agree with the Duke for being an absentee father this entire time, because he only cares about Sophia. But I was like, okay, I mean, at that point, that's treason. I don't have nothing to say about that. Typically, treason in this way is treated as life imprisonment or death. Typically death, because they don't want any possibility of trying to do treason and usurp the throne again. But the audacity, my God, Jonas. Also, I thought it was better than he was when he had actually no skill sets. All he ever did was be a dandy outside the house. Frolic with the peoples, with the women. Get into a bunch of conflicts and have his brother fight for him, and have his stepmommy and daddy back him up, and the royal family. I don't know where he got the audacity, but then again, they made him they treated him like he was like the next thing since sliced bread, so he was gonna believe it. And then he ended up dying, not even meeting his son, which in a way was the best thing that could ever happen to Luca, because his father was just Okay, and so that's kind of why Luca is so similar to Rudinger's, because he was raised by Rudinger in the past life. And even though we find out that they're actually not related by blood, Rudinger still sees him definitely as his nephew, and he will love him and protect him as his nephew. And I feel like his growth in the story was the reason he was able to articulate this to him in this life. And it was just really nice to see, particularly for Luca, because his life was not easy by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, imagine having to go through all that to then end up alone. Like, you have no one by your side. You're just this duke taking care of this estate, and then learning that you're not even related to any of them. So you're just used as this like pawn the entire time, and that your father was an idiot, was a dimbat, and a douche, honestly. So just and that your aunt, who you thought didn't love you at all, ends up dying for you essentially. It's just so much trauma. So I'm very glad for him that the chalice worked and that he was able to go back in time and really change everybody's life. But that, also that Judith was able to redeem herself in many ways, and also take back control. Because another thing is, Judith is part of the royal family. She is the granddaughter of the sister Margaret who ran away, that caused the king to be so controlling. And so she would have never figured that out. Even Luca didn't know that, like in last life. So she would have never figured out that she actually had family outside of her small family, because they were the only two left of the Maybound family. So now knowing that they actually have the entire royal family, who seems pretty tight-knit considering like the prince and the princess are fighting for the throne. But that is the most, how can I say? That is the nicest competitive royal family I have ever seen, because usually they're stabbing themselves in the back, poisoning each other, trying to kill each other, taking the lives of the people they care about, all this stuff. And they were just like, yeah, just fighting so, like, there's so much, I don't know, like good spirit, I guess. And then the siblings were all pretty chill considering. Princess Melina, though, was a little, how do I say? She also, because the children, the two kids under the king, the former king, were neglected because they all, he controlled Vanessa so much and she was his favorite because of her light purple eyes. They were definitely neglected. And so Manila has a lot of hate love towards her younger sister and Jonas and all this stuff, and Sophia herself, because she kind of knew that the father, the Duke, only married Vanessa for that reason, to get them her maid. And she's very interesting as a character, because she also doesn't take her hate out on Sophia, and she doesn't take her hate out on Judith, considering that she is the granddaughter of the woman that quote unquote started everything. So I just think the king was very controlling to begin with, so I can't really blame Princess Margaret for leaving. She tried to talk to her brother, and her brother just was like, no, like very controlling to the point. Like, it's very, I mean, he's so old now that I don't think it's really going to change. I mean, I think there's just like his children have just accepted the fact that he's the way he is. I mean, that meeting about Judith's marriage with Rudiger, it was insane. He'd rather marry off Charlotte, a 10-year-old, with Lucas, or make an engagement with them, than allow Judith to marry a whole 27-year-old. Is not allowed to marry, but he's willing to force a 10-year-old. That needs some serious therapy, and I'm happy that the entire family was like, no. Poor Charlotte had to grow up so much, because that's another thing. Charlotte looks exactly like the queen, the deceased queen, and so everybody really transposes their emotions of their mother towards her as well. So all the siblings love Charlotte so much, and she knows it's because she looks so much like her mother. And there's just so many instances of people loving others, but also putting them in a box because they resemble and they remind them of someone that's like long gone. Princess Vanessa, Judith are both quote unquote substitutes for Princess Margaret. Jonas is quote unquote a substitute for Princess Vanessa. And Charlotte is quote unquote a substitute for her mother. So it's just, but it's very human in the way that the webtoon goes over this, because honestly this happens a lot in real life, and there's really no solutions to it. Many times you kind of just have to live with it, and that's like really messed up to say. But some people just live with it. They just have to accept that this is a part of their life, because many people, the strength it takes to change that mindset, to change that reality, you will need to go to therapy and really like see into yourself. And is every single person in that family going to do that? Particularly the king. He's so stubborn. This man is so stubborn. It was hilarious, but also so stubborn. Oh my God, I wanted to smack him sometimes, but I respect my elders, so I would never do that. But I was just so like, I want him to have a moment where he comes to terms with the fact that he will never be able to apologize to Margaret, and that's just his fate. But he also should have never treated his children in that way. And he has to apologize to them, or at least accept the wrongdoing he's done. I mean, just maybe become aware of how being stuck in the past has made him neglect the present and the people around them. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Maybe we'll see that in the next few episodes. Well, next few chapters. So, anyways, I really recommend this webtoon because just the character growth, even if you know what's happening, like, just the way that all the characters are so gray. There's not anyone that's like Mary Sue or Gary Stu, just like Mary Sue, Gary Stu, just like coming in here being given everything without doing really anything. Like, Judith had to really fight to get stuff throughout this thing. People underestimated her a lot. Lucas underestimated her a lot. Like, the poor girl was out here sweating it out because this 10-year-old didn't think she could do things. And she also was trying to figure things out with her limited memories. And she ended up, like, resolving quite a few things and preventing Franz from doing crazy stuff. So she did stuff, but she did things in a way that a normal human being could do things. Like, she never had a superpower. She never had an outside thing, like an outside entity that was helping her. It was always her. So in her limited capacity, she did what she could. And I thought it was pretty good. And she also knew when to ask for help. Like, the moment that she realized she couldn't, like, handle Franz anymore, she was like, okay, I need to tell Rudinger because, you know, I have to be logical. And I love Luca for doing the same thing because he's also in a child's body. And although sometimes he went overboard, he was trying to fight a whole assassin with a knife, a butter knife. Oh my God, at 10 years old, with the 10-year-old body, no, that wasn't going to work out for you, Luca. But he realized, or at least he realizes when he needs help. So he also asked Rudinger to, like, look into Franz. So I liked how more down to earth these characters were. They knew where their limits were and they knew what they needed to do. So I highly recommend The Villain Flips the Script, or I think the other name for it is This Villain Would Change the Genre, because it was supposed to be a revenge story and she changes the genre. She wanted to change it to a child rearing fantasy genre. And it was really cute of her to do that. And I like that they're actually, like, still nephew and aunt. That's really cute. Like, they actually are the original characters. So it's not like the original Judith got replaced and, like, we don't know what happened to her. But then this person redeems Judith, who's a completely different soul. It's like, is really Judith redeeming herself and asking for forgiveness for her past mistakes, than it is someone else doing that. So also, I gotta say, I noticed something about transmigrations. They do so much sometimes to discredit. This is coming from, I was reading this martial arts one, this webtoon. It was, I think, reincarnating escort warrior, or reincarnated escort warrior, where he really just talks so much crap. I didn't want to say that, but it came out. I guess I was more emotional than I thought. He talked so badly about the person he replaced, but I just kept thinking, this person was probably a great artist. He was, because he was a very timid, oops, my bad. I think I'm misremembering. This might be Duke of Pentagram. No, he was still making fun of him. He thought he was like this, he never really sought to understand him. He only ever believed other people's rumors about the character. And so he didn't realize that he was actually more kind-hearted than most people made him seem. Like, he would help the XCX workers in the house of services, let's say, write letters to their hometowns, and, like, he did things. And I don't ever really like when the main character transmigrates into someone else's life and starts talking poo-poo about their character, particularly because they don't really know them. They only ever know, like, well, it depends if the person has the memories and the character was actually really that bad. But in some cases, they're not bad, and, like, they're just like a gray area character, or they're maladjusted to their situation, if that makes any sense. But the MC is always, like, talking about how weak-minded and stuff they were and how useless they were. And I'm like, No. They're just in this situation. They're not built to be a leader. They're a person that would do better in the arts or something, or as a psychiatrist. Like they're not unworthy just because they couldn't fit this expectation of other people, you know. So I think the one I was actually thinking about was the Duke of Pentagram, because the character there, the original, I think the name was Aaron. We're gonna go with it. Aaron Pentadragon, he was very timid. And so he made him feel like the entire time the MC is talking about how he's so weak and stuff like this. But it's like this child was unfortunately born in a situation where he had to take on a duchy on top of his shoulders, but he was not built for that. He was a timid, shy person who was a better painter than anything else. And if he had been in another setting, he would have succeeded completely. But unfortunately, he lived as in a duchy, and he had to be a leader. He has to be like Raven, but he wasn't. Anyways, the reason I brought that up is because in this story, I appreciate that Judith understands the bad qualities of the OG Judith, because she thinks she's a transmigrator until the end. And she knows that she's like bad. She's like, oh my God, you're insane. But she never talks badly in terms of like reprimanding Judith for being like crappy, or like, I don't know how to explain it. She doesn't like look down on Judith. She understands Judith has done bad things, but she doesn't ever see Judith, the original Judith, as like beneath her, which I appreciated, because Judith is just human, a human that made mistakes, very big mistakes towards a child that didn't deserve it. But she wasn't a monster in terms of, because the main thing Judith did was neglect, which doesn't make it any better or worse, but she wasn't a monster. She was just a person that allowed her trauma to make her into a bad person to this child, if that makes any sense. So I appreciated that as well about the story. They respected the original Judith, quote unquote, by allowing her to not be painted as this scum of the earth, like they do in certain transmigration novels, where it's just like the character was just not well adapted, or didn't have the skill set for the kind of life they were born into, and so everybody thought they were useless or a waste, when they in fact were decent people anywhere else. So, except I'm not saying Judith's abuse was allowable. That's not allowable. We do not believe in the abuse of the children here. So yeah, I recommend this. I also do recommend the Reincarnated Escort Warrior and the Duke of Pentagram. I keep saying pentagram. I mean pentadragon. I don't know where the pentagram is coming from. It's a story about a dragon. Even though sometimes Aaron/Raven doesn't sit right with me, he does something like, every time I was reading, I was like, but the art is great, and his actions and like the things he does is like, oh, he's like so driven, and you're just like watching a character succeed. Anyways, this is the end of the video. Hope you read this webtoon. Have a good day. Bye.